Did God curse black people? That's what we're talking about on this video. Now, why would I even ask a question like this? Isn't there enough strife out there without me stirring the racial pot of hatred and lies? Oh, yeah, there's more than enough racial strife in America. My intent is not to stir the pot or to add more rotten ingredients into the pot. My intent is to destroy the pot. But this can only be done by countering hatred with love and lies with truth. So this video confronts one of those old lies. What is the lie? This is the old lie that God cursed black people to be slaves. Where did this lie come from? Up until the 1600s, slavery in America was based solely on economics. Europeans, Africans, and Native Americans were enslaved. As the economy grew, the need for slaves grew. The answer to this growing need of slaves was tragically simple. Get more slaves and make them permanent. Permanent slavery and Christianity clashed. Now, the problem with Christianity, well, I'm talking about biblical Christianity and permanent slavery, is they don't go together. People, lots of people, tons of people, white people began to ask tough questions. How can Christians enslave people forever who are made in the image of God? Not only did they ask tough questions, they organized public opinion and opposition against slavery. Well, this didn't go over too well with the slavers. In fact, it led directly to the United States Civil War. Of course, after the slave states lost the war, they changed their story about the reason for going into the war in the first place. They said the war wasn't about slaves, it was about states' rights. What states' rights? I'll let you know. In the dead of night, I wrapped myself in old red, white, and blue. That's right, the American flag. And I broke into Confederate headquarters and absconded with top secret documents. Let's take a look at one of them. Folks, I am excited. Look, we are looking at a primary source. Folks, we are looking at the primary document of the state of Mississippi's secession document. What is this? It's the document they filed before they left the Union. So let's take a look at this document and get a firsthand account of the state of mind of one of the slave states before they left the Union. All right, secession of Mississippi. Look, setting forth the declaration of the immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of Mississippi. And also, several of the slave states filed similar documents. Matter of fact, I believe they have the same title here. A few of them didn't, but most of them did. Anyway, let's go on. Secession of Mississippi, Federal Union, and the Ordinance of Secession. A declaration of the immediate causes which induce and justify the secession of the state of Mississippi from the federal union. I'm going to read through this quickly to save time. In the momentous step which our state has taken of dissolving its connection with the government of which we so long formed a part, it is but just that we should declare the prominent reasons which have induced our course. Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world. Its labor supplies the product which constitutes by far the largest and most important portions of the commerce of the earth. These products are peculiar to the climate verging on the tropical regions, and by an imperious law of nature, none but the black race can bear exposure to the tropical sun. These products have become necessities of the world, and a blow at slavery is a blow at commerce and civilization. That blow has long aimed at the institution and was at the point of reaching its consummation. There was no choice left us but submission to the mandates of abolition or a dissolution of the Union, whose principles had been subverted to work out our ruin. That we do not overstate the dangers to our institution, a reference to a few facts will sufficiently prove. The hostility to this institution, remember what institution? Institution of slavery, commenced before the adoption of the Constitution and was manifested in the well known Ordinance of 1787 in regard to the Northwestern Territory. The feeling increased until in 1819, 1820, it deprived the South of more than half the vast territory acquired from France. He's talking about, or they're talking about, the Louisiana Purchase. The same hostility dismembered Texas and seized upon all the territory acquired from Mexico, or saying once they took Mexico's land, you didn't let us bring slavery in there. It has grown until it denies the right of property in slaves and refuses protection to that right on the high seas, in the territories, and wherever the government of the United States had jurisdiction. It refuses the admission of new slave states into the Union and seeks to extinguish it by confining it within its present limits, denying the power of expansion. Fighting words. It tramples the original equality of the South underfoot. It has nullified the fugitive slave law in almost every free state in the Union and has utterly broken the compact which our fathers pledged their faith to maintain. Oh, here comes some big sins. It advocates Negro equality, socially and politically, and promotes insurrection and incendiarism in our midst. It has enlisted its press, its pulpit, and its schools against us until the whole popular mind of the North is excited and inflamed with prejudice. We wouldn't want prejudice. It has made combinations and formed associations to carry out its schemes of emancipation in the states and wherever else slavery exists. It seeks not to elevate or to support the slave, but to destroy his present condition without providing a better. Your opinion. It has invaded a state and invested with the honors of martyrdom the wretch whose purpose was to apply flames to our dwellings and the weapons of destruction to our lives. It has broken every compact into which it has entered for our security. It has given indubitable evidence of its design to ruin our agriculture, to prostrate our industrial pursuits, and to destroy our social system. It knows no relenting or hesitation in its purposes. It stops not in its march of aggression and leaves us no room to hope for cessation or for pause. It has recently obtained the control of government. They're talking about the election of Abraham Lincoln by the prosecution of its unhallowed schemes and destroyed the last expectation of living together in friendship and brotherhood. Utter subjugation awaits us in the Union if we should consent longer to remain in it. It is not a matter of choice, but of necessity. We got to keep these slaves. We must either submit to degradation and to the loss of property worth 4 billions of money, or we must secede from the union framed by our fathers to secure this as well as every other species of property. For far less cost than this, our fathers separated from the crown of England. Our decision is made. We follow their footsteps. We embrace the alternative of separation. And for the reasons here stated, we resolve to maintain our rights with the full consciousness of the justice of our course and the undoubting belief of our ability to maintain it. And let the church say amen. All right, so there you have it, folks. Now, you may notice there was no direct reference of God in this, but they did say nature itself. Nature itself tells us that these black folks are much more equipped with that black skin and that resilience to get out there in that hot sun and work for us. But I want to show you what Texas said. They made direct reference to Almighty God. Okay, let's take a look at Texas. Same thing, Declaration of Causes, February 2nd, 1861, a declaration of the causes which impelled the state of Texas to secede from the federal union. We're not going to read all of it, okay, because it's pretty much the same thing that Mississippi said, different words, but this one goes into some detail. They make some references to Almighty God, okay, and the Lord being on the side of the good Christians. All right. And that's what we're looking at, right? This is, look, this is not the stir up some old stuff about what Mississippi did or what Tennessee did or what the slave states did. We know what they did. I am using this to show you from official documents just how pervasive was the mindset that God was on the side of the slavers. And where did they get this from? A lot of this came from twisting scriptures in the Bible. So let's take a look at it. In all the non-slave holding states, in violation of that good faith and comity which should exist between entirely distinct nations, the people have formed themselves into a great sectional party, now strong enough in numbers to control the affairs of each of those states, based upon the unnatural feeling of hostility to these southern states. Listen, and their beneficent and patriarchal system of American slavery. So they saw it as a good thing. They saw themselves as good guys taking care of, little savage black folks, and we're helping them out, proclaiming the debasing doctrine of the equality of men. It is a pretty bad doctrine, equality of men, irrespective of race or color. A doctrine, listen to this, a doctrine at war with nature, in opposition to the experience of mankind and in violation of the plainest revelations of the divine law. They demand the abolition of Negro slavery throughout the Confederacy, the recognition of political equality between the white and Negro races, and avow their determination to press on their crusade against us, so long as a Negro slave remains in these states. Let's go on. Here's a good passage. They have proclaimed and at the ballot box sustained the revolutionary doctrine that there is a, quote, higher law, end of quote. What was that higher law? The higher law was folks in the North were using the Bible. A higher law than the Constitution and laws of our federal union, and virtually that they will disregard their oaths and trample upon our rights. Let's go on. Now listen to this. We hold as undeniable truth that the governments of the various states and of the Confederacy itself were established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, that the African race had no agency in their establishment, that they were rightfully held and regarded as an inferior and dependent race, and in that condition only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial or tolerable. Can't even tolerate y'all. That in this free government all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights, that the servitude of the African race as existing in these states is mutually beneficial to both bond and free, slave and free. Basically, slavery is good for everybody, slave and free people, and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind. And here's the part, and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator, as recognized by all Christian nations. You see, this is one reason why black folks, a lot of black folks, when you talk to them about the Lord, they're like, wait a minute here, I can read and I know about stuff like this. Revealed will of the Almighty Creator as recognized by all Christian nations, while the destruction of the existing relations between the two races, as advocated by our sectional enemies, would bring inevitable calamities upon both and desolation upon the 15 slave holding states. Now we'll read this last passage here. For these and other reasons, solemnly asserting that the federal constitution has been violated and virtually abrogated by the several states named, seeing that the federal government is now passing under the control of our enemies to be diverted from the exalted objects of its creation to those of oppression and wrong, and realizing that our own state can no longer look for protection but to God and her own sons, we, the delegates of the people of Texas in convention assembled, have passed an ordinance dissolving all political connection with the government of the United States of America and the people thereof, and confidently appeal to the intelligence and patriotism of the free men of Texas to ratify the same at the ballot box on the 23rd day of the present month. Now, notice this, adopted in convention on the second day of February in the year of our Lord, 1861, by the independence of Texas, and 25th in the year of our Lord. Okay, now let's transition to look at the main scriptures that slavers used to teach that God cursed black people to slavery. Okay, the passage we're reading is Genesis 9th chapter, verses 20 through 27, and I am reading from the English Standard Version. Verse 20, Noah began to be a man of the soil, and he planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it on both of their shoulders, and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father. Their faces were turned backward, and they did not see their father's nakedness. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, he said, Cursed be Canaan. A servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. He also said, Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. Okay, let's take a look at this primary scripture that slavers used to justify black people being cursed to be slaves. It's verse 25 right here. He said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers. Now, of course, that same statement was stated a couple of other times here. All right, so let's begin with this here. Now, this verse was creatively interpreted by Europeans and American slavers to rebuff religious pushback against slavery. Previously, people had been enslaved without regard to skin color. The new interpretation, however, provided a biblical basis to enslave black people because of their skin color. Now, there are four claims of the curse of Ham lie. Number one, Ham was cursed. Number two, Ham's descendants were black Africans. Number three, Africans were therefore divinely ordained for slavery. And number four, black skin was the mark of a curse. None of this is in the Bible. Let's deal with these four lies one at a time. Lie number one, Ham was not cursed. Ironically, the scriptures that the slavers used to support Ham as being cursed are the very scriptures that show Ham was not cursed. These same scriptures also show that Ham was not even the one that was the topic of discussion. Another figure was the topic. You see, first you came after the bacon. Now you're coming after the ham. I rebuke you in the mighty name of breakfast. Okay, look, let's dissect this lie piece by piece and bury it in a deep grave. Okay, let's take a look at the ninth chapter of Genesis. Okay, what I want to do in this ninth chapter is I want to show you who God was focusing on. Okay, let's go to the 18th verse. Look at this. The sons of Noah who went forth from the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Notice this. Ham was the father of Canaan. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the people of the whole earth were dispersed. Question. Ham was the father of Canaan. Now, what about these two guys, Shem and Japheth? Who are they fathers of? Ham was the father of Canaan. So why not Shem was the father of whoever and Japheth was the father of? Because we're not talking about them. We're not focusing on them. We're focusing on Canaan. 22nd verse. And Ham, the father of Canaan, there we go again, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers. So that's two times. Instead of him just saying Ham, he says Ham, the father of Canaan. That's pretty odd to refer to someone like that. Let's look at example number 3, 25th verse. Okay, let's start at 24th verse. Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. He said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be to his brothers." Let's look at verse 26. He also said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Okay, let's look at verse 27. "May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant." Okay, so let's establish two things here. Number one, who is the topic here? Whose name do you see continue to be repeated? Why is there such an odd way of talking about Ham? Let's take a look, because this is the crux right here. 22nd verse. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness. Not just Ham. Ham saw the nakedness and told his two brothers, Shem and Japheth. It says Ham, the father of Canaan. Why? Because we want you to focus on Canaan. Then we go down to the verse 25. Cursed be Canaan. Let me ask you a question. Who did Noah say would be cursed? Did he say Ham would be cursed, or did he say Canaan would be cursed? I know, beating this dead horse, but I got to go back. 22nd verse. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. We know what Shem and Japheth did. Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him. He said, "Cursed be Canaan." Instead of him saying, "Cursed be Ham," Ham is the one who did this. He says, "Cursed be Canaan, who is a descendant of Ham." Remember that. Cursed be Canaan. Verse 25, cursed be Canaan. Verse 26, let Canaan be his servant. Verse 27, let Canaan be his servant. Who is to be the servant? Ham or Canaan? Canaan. Okay, let's develop this point that it was not Ham who was cursed. It was instead Canaan. We're going to go over some facts. I'm going to show you a map. We are going to make sure we understand who was actually cursed. Let's look at God's promise to give him the land of Canaan. This is in Genesis 15 chapter verses 12 through 16. All right, here we go. As the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell on Abram, and behold, a dreadful and great darkness fell upon him. Then the Lord said to Abram, "Know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there. They will be afflicted for 400 years, but I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they shall come out with great possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried in a good old age, and they, your descendants, shall come back here in the fourth generation." Why so long away? "For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." Okay, so that was the passage, one of the passages where God is telling Abraham about the land of Canaan and about his descendants, and he's prophesying what's going to happen to them. Now, I'm going to put on screen a map that shows you the land of Canaan and the inhabitants of that land, these 7 nations. And I'll go over some good facts with you. So you recall where God said that they shall come back here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So your descendants are going to be in that land, and they're not going to come back for a very long time. Now, here's the deal. The Amorites were people of one of several nations in the land of Canaan. You can see them right here. And the Bible even lists them. Here, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, that later became Jerusalem, Girgashites, and then actually in Deuteronomy 7 chapter 1st verse, it lists these nations. So you can see that the Amorites are pretty much dead center in that map. And so, like I said, they represent all of those nations there. And so it wasn't just that one nation, it's that entire land of Canaan, right? Because the children of Israel didn't just inherit that small portion where the Amorites were, they inherited the land of Canaan, which comprised those seven nations. Okay, so at least those seven nations. All right, let's go on. So here's something else I want you to know is that when we go back to Genesis 15, chapter, verse 12, it says right here, know for certain that your offspring will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs and will be servants there. They will be afflicted 400 years. Now, the Amorites were to be judged more than 500 years from the time Abraham received that promise from God. I'm counting these 400 years of the slavery, plus there's about 100 years that elapses from the time that Abraham was given this prophecy until the time that they went into slavery. So 100 plus 400 is 500 years. Now, here's the last point in this section, but we're going to develop it further in the next section. And it is this: the Amorites were to be judged for their sins. This was not just an arbitrary, well, there's some land over there, somebody's there, we'll just take theirs and give it to you. Nope, that's not how God operates. The Amorites were judged for their sins. Okay, we're going to look at some verses now in Leviticus and Deuteronomy that's going to show you that God did not arbitrarily just run these people off of their land and just give it to the Hebrews. That's not how he operates. I said that already, but now we're going to see these people were dispossessed, kicked out of the land because of their sin against the Lord. And here is something I want to bring out. It's very important. God told Abraham that these people had not yet crossed the line of judgment. It would take another 500 years of God dealing with these people before he would act so severely. Keep that in mind, that God takes his time. He shows mercy for a long period of time, but when he acts resolutely and severely. Leviticus 18th chapter, verses 24 and 25. Do not make yourselves unclean by any of these things, the things mentioned earlier. For by all these, the nations I am driving out before you have become unclean, and the land became unclean, so that I punished its iniquity. That same iniquity that he said they have not filled up to the full yet, this is the iniquity. They had filled it up to the full. See, we're now 500 years after that prophecy. And the land vomited out its inhabitants. And to further prove my point that God is not capricious and just arbitrary and just says, there's some land, I'll take theirs and give it to you. So we have seen that he said, here's the reason why I'm kicking them out. But look at his impartiality. Let's continue. 26th verse. But you shall keep my statutes and my rules and do none of these abominations, either the native or the stranger who sojourns among you. For the people of the land who are before you did all of these abominations, so that the land became unclean, lest the land vomit you out. And when you make it unclean, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. So you see what God says? I kicked them out. I'll kick you out. And actually, he did kick them out later on. But anyway, let's go on. Let's go back to the 21st verse, and we're going to look at something that just hideous. 21st verse. You shall not give any of your children to offer them to Molech, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Who was Molech? Molech was a false god that the demon power behind that false god required a living sacrifice of babies. And that's what those people were doing, whom God drove out of the land. They were sacrificing their children alive into fires for these false gods. Let's go on. I have a scripture that will make that even more clear. Okay, so we're looking at Deuteronomy, the 12th chapter and the 29th verse. When the Lord your God cuts off before you the nations whom you go in to dispossess, and you dispossess them and dwell in their land, take care that you be not ensnared to follow them after they have been destroyed before you, and that you do not inquire about their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods, that I also may do the same? You shall not worship the Lord your God in that way. For every abominable thing that the Lord hates, they have done for their gods. For they even burn their sons and their daughters in the fire to their gods. That's the nation, or those were the nations that God dispossessed. Let's take a look at another verse in Leviticus 18 chapter 29th verse. Here we are, Leviticus 18:29. For everyone who does any of these abominations, the persons who do them shall be cut off from among their people. What abominations? Well, that if you read that 18th chapter, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff, and included are a bunch of sexual perversions. Okay, so here's the deal. Canaan was judged for their sins. This was not an arbitrary move by a mean God, capricious God who just saw some land over here and says, let me take their land and put my people over there. That's not how it happened. You've seen the scriptures. The land of Canaan sinned against the Lord. He appealed to them for at least 500 years. And after they continued to resist his mercy, their cup of sin reached to the top, spilled over, and then they were judged. Point number two, we are tearing this stronghold down. Canaanites were neither black nor Africans. Now, I'm going to show you some maps. We're going to answer the question, where is Canaan? Okay, so let's look at some maps. I'll show you several. Okay, so here's an ancient map of Canaan and, of course, the surrounding areas. So the curse, according to the Bible, Canaan, a descendant of Ham, was cursed. Not Ham, a descendant of Ham, which was Canaan. We made that very clear. We looked several places in the scriptures. Canaan was to be cursed. Okay, now where's Canaan? Is Canaan in Africa? Because that's what the slavers came up with back in the 1700s, 1800s. Well, actually, it was closer to when the slavers started coming under a lot of attack by the abolitionists. They needed to come up with some justification to do something that was so clearly contrary to the Bible and the Christianity that they taught. So they came up with a perversion of the scriptures that said Ham was cursed. And according to them, Ham went, to Africa. So all black folks, that's cursed. Well, we already seen that. What we're going to look at now is where did Canaan go? Because if Canaan is the one that is to be cursed, we need to find out where he lived. Okay, here we go. Here's Canaan. Here's Egypt. All of this here, guess what this is? That's Africa. This part here is called the Sinai Peninsula. See this land, it juts out like that. It's a peninsula. Everything going to the left here, that's going west. Everything west, that's Africa. Going east, you know what this is? It is Asia. Now that's surprising to some people. Everything to the right of Egypt here, Asia. And we'll look at another map and that will become even more clear. Okay, so here's a more modern map of the area. So I want to bring out some critical points here. Canaan's descendants settled in this area here called the Levant. Okay, this region is Asian, not African. Notice here, this is Egypt, this is Asia. So you can see to the left of your screen is Egypt, and you see Africa. To the right of your screen, look at the far right, you see Asia. And you have the boundary of Africa and Asia, which is right here. I don't know if you see the Red Sea and you see the peninsula there. You see where the orange is right to the left. You have that little piece of land that juts out to the Red Sea. That's the Sinai Peninsula. I'll show you a map of that. And just above it, you see where it says Israel. So that Sinai Peninsula, there's a boundary. You can't see it now because they did not have a canal back in that time. But I'll show you another picture that shows a canal. And that canal connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. That is the boundary that separates Africa on the left with Asia on the right. Now, a lot of people don't think about like the Middle East and all of that as Asia, but it's Asia. We call it the Middle East, but that's not a technical geographical term. That's more of like a colloquial term. So, anyway, or a popular culture term. So, the boundary of Africa and Asia, Africa ends at Egypt, Asia begins at the Sinai Peninsula, Canaan, north of Sinai, and the Canaanites were geographically Asian, not African. Now, the ancient Egyptians didn't consider Canaanites African. That's very important. The Egyptian records distinguish clearly between the Nubians to the south, Libyans to the west. Now, the Canaanites were labeled Asiatics or Amu, AAMU, not Africans. Let's look at a couple of more maps and bring this thing home. Okay, man, we are driving this thing home. You will not leave here not knowing the truth. So here is the Levant, where you see Israel is. You see the Sinai Peninsula right there to the right where it says Egypt. All of that where it says Egypt is Africa. Okay, let's get you another map. Okay, so you see the Sinai Peninsula very clearly. You see Egypt there, all of that Sinai Peninsula and Egypt to the left. All of that is Africa. And then to the right, where the Sinai Peninsula is, over to Israel, all of that, that's Asia. Okay, let's get another map and we'll close out with that one. We'll end the map portion. All right, there we go. This is a good one. Okay, so notice where it says Africa, Egypt, very clear. You see the Red Sea to the right. You see the Suez Canal. That's where they cut through the land to connect the bodies of water. That is the boundary between Africa and Asia. All right. So where was the Levant? Or where is the Levant? It's over here to the right. You see the Suez Canal. Looks like sewing stitches. You see the peninsula where the Red Sea is, and then right above to the right, you see Israel. And all that area there is the Levant. That's where Canaan was. Okay, or Canaan is. Okay, so you have Ham, and he had 4 sons, and one of those sons is Canaan. Canaan went to that area where the Amorites, the Hittites, the Canaanites, and all of those guys are. Okay. The other 3 sons went to Africa. And let's talk about them. And the other 3 sons went to Africa. Let's talk about them. Now we're going to look at something else that's pretty interesting. There is something in the Bible called the Table of Nations. And this is when you recall when there was, the guys were building a Tower of Babel, and the Lord came down and demolished it and separated the languages, confused everyone, and they went into different directions. Well, the 10th chapter shows them going off into different areas and settling. So this shows where the different groups went. Notice this. We want to find out, where did the descendants of Ham go? Remember, the slavers told us Ham was cursed. The Bible didn't say that. Who did the Bible say was cursed? Said Canaan. Several times. Canaan, Canaan, Canaan. Ham had those 4 sons. They went out. One of them was cursed, and we found out that that one was cursed not because of his skin, but because of sin, right? And it didn't happen, immediately. It happened 500 years later. Now, was he black? Like, if he were black, if he were to be black, was he black right then? Of course he was. So why wait 500 years before he got cursed? No, the Bible was very clear. This son, the one who was cursed, his name was Canaan, and it was for a reason. And that reason occurred 500 years later. We found out that that son lived in the Levant. He was over there in Asia, not Africa. So now let's find out where the other sons went. And let's find out where they cursed. That's what I'm getting at. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Remember, these three sons, remember, those were the ones that when Noah got lit up, drunk, it was Ham that saw him and went and made fun of him and told the other brothers, and they, backed up and honored their father. He woke up and he didn't say, "Cursed are you, Ham." He said, "No, cursed is Canaan." Okay, so now we're going to look at something that's pretty interesting. This is called the Table of Nations. After God came down and separated the nations at the Tower of Babel and sent them out in confusion, he confused their languages. They went out to different places and settled in the lands. This is telling you where these sons settled. So remember, Noah had three sons, and this is showing where they went and the sons that they had. These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. So we're in Genesis 10th chapter. Verse 2, it names the sons of Japheth and where they went. You go down to verse 21, and it names Shem and his sons and where they all went. Well, I want to focus on Ham because Ham is the topic of discussion, right? That's the slaver said. Ham is the one that's cursed. We found out it's Canaan. Let's look at the lineage of Ham and where they went. The sons of Ham: Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. These four. You see Canaan. We know where Canaan went. Canaan went to where? Asia, the Levant, the land of Canaan, right? Which to the east of Africa. Okay. What about these three guys? Cush, Egypt, and Put. Where did they go? Well, we know where Egypt is, right? Egypt is in Africa. All right. What about Put and Cush? Let's look at the map. Okay, so let's look at this map of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Look at over here. You see descendants of Ham has the orange right there. You look and you see Egypt, kind of like to the center and then down. You see Egypt, and then to the bottom right, you see Ethiopia. That's Cush. Egypt, Ethiopia, or they call them Cushites. To the left of Egypt and a little bit up, you see Libya, Ludum, Put. So basically, what you have is one of the sons went to Asia, the other three went to Africa. Now, here is what I want to ask. Were these three sons and their descendants cursed in the Bible? Well, the Bible didn't say they were cursed, did it? The Bible said Canaan was cursed. And we know Canaan did get cursed because God dispossessed them. He ordered Israel to be his hand of judgment upon those nations. That's why the command was so severe. We say, well, they were annihilated. Yes, because that was God's judgment upon them. God uses nations to judge nations. Now, let me bring out some points concerning these three sons, okay? Out of all of these, I'm going to bring out their skin colors only because of our topic, right? Don't read anything silly into this. Don't, be like racist and people like that. I just have to mention that because, all kind of people look at these videos. Okay, I'm bringing this up because we're dealing with the lie, the slaver's lie that skin color was cursed. So I'm talking about that in that context. Okay, if you look at these four sons, it's ironic to me that of these four sons, the one with the lightest skin was not in Africa. The one who lived in Canaan had the lightest skin of all. Isn't that amazing? The ones who were cursed had the lighter skin. Again, please don't read some type of racist stuff into that. We're just talking about what happened in history and how it is ironic that the slavers used or twisted a verse about Ham being cursed, which the Bible did not say. It said Canaan would be cursed. And we know that from history that Canaan was the lightest of the four sons, and he went to Asia and wound up being cursed. And the three darker people are in Africa, and they were not cursed. It's just amazing when you look at this stuff. All right. So Canaan had the lighter skin. Now, the darker skin, Mizraim, which is Egypt, Cush, which are the Ethiopians. Then you have Put, Libya. So all of that region right there, those were the darker skinned people. Now, history shows us they were not cursed. So let me bring out some stuff here. Egypt. Well, Egypt, we really don't have to say too much about Egypt. Everybody knows, well, people who know history know that Egypt was one of the greatest civilizations that has ever existed. Okay, it's just, writing, law, medicine, engineering, architecture. Folks are still going there today looking at things that they built back there, 2,000 years BC. And how did they do this? We don't know. So we know they were a world superpower. Then we look at Cush. In the Bible, Cush is talked about as being formidable. They were allies of Egypt. As a matter of fact, they were allies and peers. I even found out that the Cushite kings ruled Egypt as the 25th dynasty. So they were very close. And obviously, if you're going to get in there and rule Egypt as the pharaohs, matter of fact, at the time that they ruled, they called that the time of the Black Pharaohs. That doesn't sound too cursed, right? Ethiopia. Now, this is very important or interesting. Ethiopia was not a victim of the Atlantic slave trade or the Saharan slave trade with the Muslims. And that's very significant because when you think of Africa, you automatically, Africa was just, just raped. They just went over there and just every place just grabbed slaves and ran off. Well, no. They did that some places, but not all places. Ethiopia was one of those places where they got some, a few handful on the edges. The Muslims did. They couldn't do it the way it happened in other coastal lands in Africa. Why could they not do that? Well, because centralized government, they had a standing army, and their geography, they didn't have an Atlantic coastline. Okay, so, and they're mountainous. So anyway, you would think if they were cursed, then you would see that in their history. So think about this. The Ethiopians had been independent forever. I think there was a brief time, World War II. Mussolini went over there and whipped up on them for a little bit, but that lasted for a little while. But what we're looking at is, were they a cursed people? Do they look like a cursed people? Not in secular history. Egypt, Cush, and Libya, Put in the Bible, they weren't cursed. They were spoken of highly as formidable warriors. We know in secular history, they weren't cursed. So here's the point. You have four sons of Ham. You have Canaan. He goes to Asia and, he settles in the Levant. And with 500 years after Abraham got the prophecy about him, we see that he was cursed. Had absolutely nothing at all to do with light skin, dark skin, whatever. It had everything to do with immoral behavior. Okay. Then we see the other three sons, Mizraim, Put, and Cush. They went to Africa and were blessed. Okay. Well, that needs to be qualified. They were blessed until the white man went over there and whipped up on them and snatched them up, working in concert with the other black slave traders. But anyway, that's a totally different topic. Okay. What we're talking about is whether or not God cursed somebody because of their skin, which he did not. And let's do our last point, which is obvious now. Black skin is not a mark of God's curse. And we looked at Egypt, Ethiopia / Nubia, and Put / Libya. Secular history, biblical history do not speak of them as being cursed at all. You can't see it in their history. So we got two last points and we'll end it. Here's the first one. 1,500 years from the death and resurrection of Christ passed before Europe and America pushed the curse of Ham lie. Think about this. 1,500 years of church history before anybody says anything about the curse of Ham. You would think if this were the case, somebody would have figured it out. That doctrine was not taught until the Europeans and Americans needed justification from the Bible to enslave black people. They found it by twisting Genesis chapter 15. They turned a moral judgment on Canaan into a racial doctrine to justify slavery. That theology collapses the moment you study Genesis carefully.